It's spooky season, ladies and gentlemen, which means I'm going to have to give you guys a Halloween special. And what's more Halloweeny than witches, who have bizarrely made an online resurgence in the past decade or so? For that reason, in this video, we're doing a deep dive into various witches' wicked witchcraft, which has been popping up all over social media. And throughout this video, we're going to answer once and for all, should we let these witches fry at the stake or fly into the moonlight? So make sure you watch for that. And with that said, let's begin. So I think the best place to start is Witchtok, which has been at the heart of modern witchcraft online. And let me tell you, the second that I dropped into Witchtok, I was informed about so much witchcraft that I've participated in the past that I had no clue I was a part of. I mean, I've seen Andrew Fleming's The Craft, so obviously I know all there is to know about witchcraft. But also apparently not, because at least according to users whose videos I've watched, collecting teeth from the tooth fairy, kind of witchcrafty. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, kind of a spell. Rain, rain, go away, come again another day, that is literally a spell for the skies and the weather. And so it seems as though our children have been indoctrinated into witchcraft from an early age. Now, from an outsider's perspective, I'll admit, some of this stuff looks a bit strange. For one, I thought the occult was mostly about tradition, so finding out the witches were on TikTok sounded a bit weird at first. But because this stuff is super popular with my generation, I guess TikTok does make sense. But two, some of the stuff I found here was really strange. For example, to try and get someone to love you, I saw that you could do the method of writing the name down of your crush 3 times on paper horizontally, writing your name down 3 times vertically, putting some honey in a jar, rolling the piece of paper up, placing it in a jar, filling it all up with honey, putting some cinnamon in the jar, and melting a candle on top of that jar. Now, from an outsider's perspective, that sounds fucking bonkers. But actually, I have no but. That is fucking bonkers. But I will say this. Despite how witches are portrayed in the media as menacing hags with green faces and warts on their noses and rotting teeth that like to eat children and place curses on people, flying away into the night and cackling with a high-pitched shriek, the witches on TikTok, at least the ones that I've seen, are not that. Most modern witches seem to be happy with placing protection spells on themselves and otherwise placing spells that are going to help them in life. So these spells might bring them luck, or wealth, or health, or love. Now, having said that, placing a spell on the stock market to try and get more money might seem like manipulating the system, but I say go for it, you sons of witches. Placing a spell on someone to get them to love you, maybe reconsider that one. But nonetheless, I had a very pleasant time on Witchtok. Whether someone has placed a spell on me to get me to think that, I don't know. And I am going to put the slider closer to fly, as in fly into the moonlight, because I had a good time. Now on to our next story. So now that I've spoken about the central hub for witchcraft online, I want to talk about a very specific event, and that was when Witchtok tried to sway the American general election. This incident made mainstream news. It was reported on Teen Vogue, Wired, and The Conversation, and it was in regards to the 2020 general election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. This heist, I guess you could call it, was perhaps one of the largest a group of witches have ever tried to pull off. Some were casting spells in an attempt to raise a mighty blue wave, while other conjurers were employing pro-Trump counter-magics. Now, something really interesting here was that these witches were trying to employ their magic on Halloween 2020, a few days before the election. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part was that Halloween happened to fall not only on a full moon, but also a blue moon, which is incredibly rare. Coincidence or witchcraft? I'll let you be the judge of that. Nonetheless, these witches banded together to try and cast a mighty blue wave to envelop the USA, and wash away what, in their words, were the corruption, injustice, and wickedness of Donald Trump, which, as we all know, they eventually got. But having said that, it was also their aim to allow this to be a peaceful transition of power, so I guess not even the metaphysical could have predicted January 6th. But during my research, I was actually fortunate enough to find a spell that people actually used. So it seems as though you needed both blue and red candles, blue paint, a cutout of the United States, a Justice tarot card, and a pin or nail. There was a bit of setup to do, and even a spell. which I'm not going to mess with now because I don't know if anything will happen now that the election is over, and I don't want to be one to mess with the forces that be. To try and remain impartial, I'm not going to move the slider, we'll leave it exactly where it is. So let's move on quickly before the hate comments come in. Now, Witchtok has become a bit of a phenomenon, which I could only guess to be a good thing, right? Well, maybe not, because in August 2020, evil magic would be cast. You see, new witches are called baby witches, right? They're less experienced witches. So these baby witches, I guess they had no clue the power that they possessed at their fingertips, and foolishly tried to hex the moon, to the dismay of all of us muggles. People were not happy with them. Article after article came out with people calling out these baby witches, you know? We were like, that's our moons, stop messing with it. But if you thought the response from non-witches was bad, wait until you hear about the response from actual, more experienced witches, because they loathed this. These more experienced witches were even madder with their baby counterparts, because their actions were besmirching the name of witches. They were disrespectful to Greek deities such as Artemis and Apollo, and now their covens as a whole were being associated with these moon hexers. Not only that, but the baby witches also hexed the Fae, which according to this Twitter thread that I found, the Fae are creatures in which fairies are based upon, and they should not be trifled with. Apparently, you shouldn't even be thinking about Faes until you have years of witchcraft experience under your belt. Definitely not for beginners. To continue, it's likely that these baby witches will now have a bloodline curse, and it's also said that the Fae will probably steal their soul as well. The worst part of this all being that many of the witches who decided to hex the moon allegedly were also planning to hex the sun next, but the media has been quiet on that one. If you're worried though, you can relax, because I found an experienced witch on Twitter who said this: "The moon and sun probably don't feel a thing. The gods will take care of it. They are not hurt, just annoyed. They also won't take some kid's stupidity out on the entire human race." Many witches came out and said that hexing the moon was actually impossible, but nonetheless this was a really bad PR day for witches, Wiccans and members of the occult everywhere. It's proved something that I've seen online, which is that baby witches are not meant to hex, they're not meant to curse, they're meant to sit down, know their place and listen. But because these baby witches are alleged to have hexed the moon, I think you guys know where I'm going with this. We're going to have to move the slider down much closer to Fry, as in Fry at the stake. Okay, so this next one is something that's been happening under our very noses, and witches, you never told us about it. Apparently, guys, there is a huge demand for cursed or haunted items on eBay. Witches are out here cursing items, placing runes on them and shit, haunting their possessions, and then selling them on eBay. So much to the fact that if you go on eBay right now, they actually have their very own little category on there titled Metaphysical and New Age. And some of this stuff is meant to be real. Like, look at these creepy ass dolls. I know that if you're skeptical, you won't believe that any of these are real. And perhaps there are some scam artists out there that make money by passing off ordinary items as genuine. But on the other hand, you've also got to wager that at least one or two of these sellers are dead serious that these items are legitimately haunted. But having said that, some of the stuff I found on here, like this dragon pendant, I thought was freaking badass, so I just had to buy it. It doesn't claim to have any magical powers or anything to protect me, but I thought it was too cool not to buy. Nonetheless, scrolling down in the metaphysical category, we have such subcategories as astrology, candles, crystals and gemstones, feng shui, handmade items, incense, Ouija boards, pagan and Wiccan items, pendants and amulets, runes and tarot cards. So it's clear to see that there's an absolute ton of varied items that would be considered metaphysical. And so while yes, there is indeed a lot of cursed or haunted items being put up for sale, that's just one side of a Wicca's coin, because it's simply such a huge subculture. Most of what's being sold is, again, luck charms, protected items, or items that might be used in witchcraft, such as candles or tarot cards. But I thought I'd bring it up because this is quite wild to me personally. I had never considered that a site as large as eBay, for example, would have its own section of stuff for Wiccans and witches, but here we are. There's definitely a mixed bag of items up here, but to me this is fascinating. Just because I found the badass dragon pendant because of this, I'm gonna move the slide up closer to Fly, even if the haunted dolls are putting me off doing so. But that's my decision. Let's keep going. So the rest of this is going to be done at night time because I thought I'd get in the spirit of the holiday. So I'll briefly glance over our next story, but if we remember back a year or two ago, everything was during lockdown, right? It was COVID times. And witches still wanted to have their coven meetings, but obviously it's very tough to do that when COVID is around. So what did they do? Well, they actually have their coven meetings over Zoom. And I wanted to do a bit of research to find out what made these online coven meetings a bit different from the standard in-person ones. And so I scoured the internet and I found this article by The New Yorker, and it was published by Maeve Dunnigan. And it reads, "Thank you so much for bearing with us as we try to navigate this scary and confusing time. In order to ensure the safety and health of our coven, the Siren Sisters of Bramble Grove will now be holding our monthly ritual Satan worship and spellcasting meeting over the video conferencing platform Zoom." The post went on to say that each intended member of the coven would be met by a raven named Galgar, and he would deliver the code for the meeting. Each witch would have to have their camera and audio on to simultaneously cast their spells. As for the guest list, Satan was put down as a maybe. It seems as though they tried to get him there, but the article neither confirms nor denies if he ever actually showed up. It went on to add that Hell had only recently upgraded to iOS 10 at the time. And it ended with the message, "I know you are all looking forward to drinking goat's bile together. Maybe it could be fun to each pour individual cups of goat's bile at home and drink them on camera. We can clink our glasses through the screen as if we were at a real goat's bile happy hour. That could be really cute." And I know that a large portion of my audience are witches or Wiccans themselves. I mean, seriously, about 35% of you are either invested in the community or are witches or Wiccans yourself. I mean, I guess it kind of comes in the territory of my content, but still I'm interested to ask, how was COVID for being a witch? How were your coven meetings? Were your powers weakened? Let me know in the comments. So, of all the stories I have for you today in this Halloween special, this one is by far the darkest. So I'm going to leave a little content warning right here. Don't watch if you don't have the stomach, because this is the tale of Boneghazi. Also known as the Tumblr witch who is caught grave robbing, we need to take things back to 2015, when in a Facebook group called the Queer Witch Collective came a post from a user of the name Ender Darling, who stated this message. Pause if you want to, but the quick synopsis was that 20 minutes from the poster's house in New Orleans was a graveyard usually reserved for the poor. As generally only less wealthy people were buried there, you could assume that it wasn't looked after too well. And apparently during rainstorms, bones and remains from the deceased would wash up. Here's the curveball. Then what would happen was the poster of this message would go to that graveyard and collect the washed up bones and human remains. So there's the context. And when she posted this message in her Queer Witch Collective group, you might assume that people would instantly be outraged, but surprisingly, at least early on, people were interested in her practices. Let me just move the sliding scale down a little bit. One user asked if this witch made any attempt at payment to the dead, to which Ender Darling responded that she brought drink, honey, and flowers. Before long though, people started criticizing Ender Darling for what they thought was grave robbing. "Do not shame me for my work," the witch posted on Facebook. Now, one of the cornerstones of the Queer Witch Collective group was that there were absolutely no forms of shame allowed whatsoever. This was a tricky one for the mods, because if they were to, at this point, remove Ender Darling, that might be seen as letting the shamers win, but obviously keeping her in the group wouldn't have been good either. One mod questioned why people were so mad, saying that this wasn't grave desecration, just merely using resources provided by the earth. This decision to defend Ender Darling, though, would prove to be the wrong one. When people remembered one teeny, tiny important fact that Ender Darling had slipped into her original post, which was that these bones were being stolen from a graveyard in which generally impoverished people were buried, which means that the people buried there were likely marginalized and disenfranchised. And since the poster was located in New Orleans of all places, it was soon heavily theorized that the people Ender Darling was stealing bones from were likely ethnic minorities, but most likely black. I joined this group 3 weeks ago, and about 10 seconds into that tenure, I see a post about someone potentially collecting black human bones. Ender is using white supremacist and colonialist tactics to do her bidding, and this is all a bit of what I would call a hullabaloo. So yeah, white person likely taking the bones of ethnic minorities. Not good on a moral or racial standpoint. But it also needs to be stated that from a Wiccan standpoint, also not good, because more experienced witches came out to say that you're not allowed to do that if the person is not in your bloodline. If you don't know the person, if you have no ties to them, you cannot use their remains in your potions or spells. So people from the group started turning on her, and then a member of the group took a screenshot of this and posted it on her public Facebook wall, and then more people knew. Eventually the press got involved, and eventually it was taken over to Tumblr. Ender Darling, known on Tumblr as Little Fucking Monster, tried to defend herself by spouting out a bunch of claims, but no one really cared. In their eyes, Little Fucking Monster was a little fucking monster. The police were soon notified and raided her house, finding human bones, teeth, and some cannabis to go along with it. The police soon tested these remains and concluded, yes, these were actually human, and so the witch got arrested. But she did get off with a 5-year sentence with time served. After that, the trail dried up, but it has gone down in absolute infamy, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to move the slider down again. It was pretty awful. So we'll have to see if these witches can redeem themselves with our next story. And for this next story, I want to take things back about a decade and talk about the resurgence of witchcraft in Romania. Because ever since the rise of social media, there has definitely been an uptake in the region. Obviously, most people, when they think of Romania, think of it as the place where vampires are from. But in the modern day, it seems as though the locals are much more interested in witchcraft, and they have been for quite a long time. Obviously, witchcraft and curses are really, really big in Eastern Europe. I remember back to the Ukrainian lady at the start of the Russian invasion that cursed the soldiers, for example. And that curse has been coming in clutch, especially recently. But back on topic, these Romanian witches over the past decade or two have been casting spells to try and push their political agenda. For example, in 2011, it was reported by Joshua Keating that angry Romanian witches were using cat excrement and dead dogs to cast spells on the president and government because their profession was about to be taxed. Many of these Romanians claimed that they were already horribly strapped for cash and didn't have enough money to make ends meet. But nonetheless, professions such as witches, astrologers, fortune tellers, and embalmers were soon to be taxed. I couldn't find much online saying that the government went back on their original decision. Romanian news doesn't exactly travel fast to British news sources, if at all. So it's to my understanding that they were indeed taxed, despite putting a curse on the government. Still, you know what, I think I'll push the slider up to fly because I just got taxed for the first time and I hate it. So I can understand where these witches are coming from. So there we have it. I guess my penny pinching saved the day, and we'll have to let these witches fly into the moonlight. They won't be getting burned today. Throughout my research, I was pleasantly surprised with how vast witchcraft was. I can definitely say that my preconceived notions of the lifestyle was perhaps a bit naive, a bit too heavily fed by the media. But I think that my career in the metaphysical will probably end here today. But I respect witchcraft a bit more than I once did. So yeah, I think that's what I have to say on the matter. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe share it with your friends. Please don't curse me though, I don't think I'd like that very much. If anything, just to cover my bases, any witches that have a few minutes spare, please could you cast a protection spell on me, because I think I'm going to need it. And with that said, please let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see me do next, because I'm only 128 videos in, and I'm already out of ideas. Thank you for watching.